In this video, you will learn how you can keep track of your GPT cost and make sure that your AI systems don't burn your wallet. I'm Zen, a software engineer, and I'll be teaching you the concept of tokens and how you can use tokens to keep track of the AI spend that you have. Now, when we look at tokens, there's really two forms of tokens. You have input tokens, which are basically the user's message and any system prompt that you use to instruct the model. And then you have the concept of output tokens. And output tokens are, of course, from the output of the model, giving you some answer to your question. In the case of GPT, you usually pay less for the input tokens and more for the output. In fact, you pay 4 times as much for the output when you use GPT 4.0. But what actually is a token? To explain this, let's say that we have an example sentence like, I have an apple. This is a sentence with 4 words, and a tokenizer splits up the sentence into different tokens, which can represent words, but it can also represent things like punctuation. In this case, we would probably tokenize the sentence like this. We would say, I have an apple, and effectively, we now have a list of 4 tokens. In this case, there are 4 words and also 4 tokens, but the reality is often a bit more complex, right? For example, if we added a full stop at the end of the sentence, then we also want to include this full stop as a separate token. And now you can already see that the amount of tokens does not equal the amount of words in a sentence necessarily. Similarly, another interesting example is saying I'm a human. In this case, depending on the tokenization strategy, you could actually tokenize it like this. I am a human. Or you can tokenize it like this. You can leave in the shorthand I'm. And then actually you only have 3 tokens. And this depends on the tokenization strategy that's used by the model that you're querying. And we are going to have a look at how this actually works in practice. Now, I want to show you a real-world example of how you can continuously monitor for the cost of your AI system. In this case, we've got some Python code where I actually coded in the input cost per 1,000 tokens and the output cost per 1,000 tokens. And if we have a look at where these values are being used, we can see that later in the code, I calculate the costs for my message input as well as my message output. To do that, though, I need to convert the input and output text into tokens. So how do I do that? Well, I've got a method here called count tokens, which allows me to translate a string message into a token representation. To do that, in this case, I use the tick token library, which is used to generate tokens from text, which is the same method that is being used by the GPT models to incur costs. Depending on your vendor, you might need to use a different tokenization library, but the point here is that I encode a string of text into those tokens, as you can see here, and then I get back a encoding, which is basically a list of those tokens. And so all I have to do then is return the length of that list, and I know how many tokens correspond with a given input text, which is great. And then again, count tokens is being used here in 3 places to get the amount of tokens for the system message, the user message, as well as the response. And this way, you can really keep track of your AI costs in these 3 very important places. So you might know that you need to fine-tune and compress your system message if your system message, for example, takes up a lot of tokens. Now let's have a look at what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to ask GPT if it can share some information from my diary because it has access to some of my diary entries. Let's start by just including 1 diary entry here. And then what you will see here is that a token count is returned. We have 126 system message tokens, only 9 tokens for the user message, which makes sense. It was a very simple question. And then we have 135 request tokens. We, of course, also have the amount of response tokens in here, 96. So the sum of this is the request tokens plus the response tokens. However, we of course have a different cost for the input and the output. So here we can see that there's a given input cost, a given output cost, and then, of course, the sum of that is our total cost. Now, the total cost here is quite small, which makes sense. You're not going to have $1 per message, right? That wouldn't be very sustainable. However, you can see how this adds up if you've got the chess system that's used 100 times a day. Now, to illustrate how this cost increases, let's actually include 3 diary entries. And you will see that the total cost increases because we will have more on the input side, as well as actually the output side, because GPT will have more information to respond with, so it will probably give us a more verbose response. Let's see what happens here. So you can already see that that system message here in blue is a lot larger, and indeed the system message token increased by quite a bit. We have 363. Then we've got 9 tokens for the user message, so together that's 372 for the request tokens. And then we've got 147 response tokens, so a little bit more. And then of course, in the end, we can see that the total cost has increased quite a bit. And so you can of course send this information to whatever logging system that you use to continuously keep track of the costs of your AI system before you get your monthly invoice, and that might have a surprisingly high amount of cost. And you don't want that because we of course want to take care of our wallet when we design these AI systems. So if this information helped you, feel free to leave a like. Also make sure to comment if you have any suggestions on other AI topics that you would like to see covered. And of course, subscribe.